Hi guys, so back pain and stretching. In this video I'm going to cover why in most cases it's generally a bad idea, and in some cases it's an extremely bad idea to be trying to stretch out back pain, or use stretching as a long-term solution, particularly on its own to try and fix your issues. So one thing that I'd say most important, an important concept in terms of kind of back pain is usually when people complain about sort of persistent back pain, if it's not that sort of sharp, real sharp, kind of deep, nasty pain, which is something more serious, 9 times out of 10, when I talk to people, clients that I train, they talk about sort of like a persistent, almost like a persistent dull ache a lot of the time, or just feeling like the lower back is just always under tension. So when a muscle's under tension, obviously, common sense would dictate that if I stretch that muscle and force it to relax, that's going to solve the problem. So although, yes, by stretching it, you're going to force it to relax, but what we haven't considered is, particularly lower back issues, if it's tight, those muscles are tight, there's a reason why. So good long-term success is going to be dependent upon understanding why and addressing that reason or reasons, as opposed to just trying to force the result that you want. So more often than not, the lower back, if we think about, I like to think of the idea of like a flagpole analogy. So if you imagine your spine's like a flagpole, your body wants to be able to, if you want to stand up straight, be able to hold that spine nice and strong and stable and be able to hold your posture. Obviously, if it's all unstable and imbalanced, it's kind of flopping around, your body isn't going to like that. So if you haven't got the, sort of inherent core stability that you need to hold that strong, what your body's going to do is it's going to start to, if you imagine like guy wires, it's going to start to drill in and start kind of inserting guy wires where it can to generate that stability that it hasn't got. So more often than not, one of the most common ways that I see that being compensated for is that the body will sort of reach down into the muscles, particularly around the hips and the top of the thighs, and use those muscles to kind of drill in guy wires to try and lock stuff down. The trouble is, because of the nature of these muscles and the fact that they're big, strong, prime moving muscles designed to generate movement, not sort of stability and posture, because they're so big and so strong and the way that they attach, they're going to start to pull you forward like this. Especially if it's grabbing these sort of hip flexors and quads, it's going to start to try and tug you forward and sort of curl you forward like this. So already, your lower back has now got more work to try and fight in this sort of tug of war against these muscles to get you more upright. And a lot of times that's why people feel that kind of tension in the lower back, is this kind of constant sort of tug of war that's going on. You imagine every step you take, these muscles are trying to rip you forward, and the lower back's like holding on for dear life, trying to hold you upright. So that's part of the reason why a lot of people have sort of very tight lower backs, is that constant tug of war. So what happens if you stretch it out? Best case scenario, yes, you'll relieve the tension. Yes, you'll get temporary relief because you've kind of tricked the body into using its stretch receptors to kind of, intercept the tightness and the signals in those muscles. You've kind of, fudged a solution, I guess. But best case scenario, because this tug of war is still going on, a couple hours or maybe a day later, all that pain and tension is just going to come straight back again because you haven't fixed that tug of war that's going on. That's the best case scenario. So best case scenario, you basically get nowhere long term. You're continually stretching yourself out and not actually get any progress. So what's the worst case scenario? So worst case scenario really is that you've, the reason why stuff is tight because it's unstable, and now you've forced more instability, which could give you a bit of a big episode. If you really push it hard and you really make it really unstable, you're going to have like a back pain episode really badly. The other thing is that, and we'll look at some of the stretches in a minute that I see people still get recommended, and I don't know why. We know that with back pain, there's no such thing as non-specific back pain. That is just a ridiculous idea. And remember, if I hear someone say that, or if you go and see a specialist and they say that to you, you translate that as, I don't know what's causing your back pain, nor do I care enough to find out. Because there's always reasons. They're not obvious. They take a bit of investigation, they take a bit of experience to find out what they are, but they are there. So obviously with back issues, you might just get these kind of shotgun stretches just fired at you because the the person that's giving them to you doesn't understand mechanics of how your injury is being created. So therefore, it's just like a bit of a desperation. I'll shotgun a few things at you. Let's just see what sticks and goes from there. So say, for example, you're someone who has, a disc bulge or slightly worse, a herniation. So that we know, or, you should know, the mechanics of a disc injury and a bulge, generally they take years and years to form, and it's due to kind of faulty and excessive flexion patterns. So flexion is being rounded forward. That lower back naturally has a slight dip in it, but if it comes too far forward, we slip in what we call excessive flexion. There's a lot of compression on the front of the disc. So if you imagine, like a jam donut or a jelly donut, if you squeeze the front end of that donut, you'd shoot the jam at the back. And that's what happens to your disc over time, is that you've got, fluid inside in the nucleus. You compress the front of the disc enough, or for enough sort of repetitions or enough force, and eventually it forces, that nucleus snakes its way out like the jam, and it's going to come out the back, form a bulge. If it progresses from the bulge, then it becomes a full-blown herniation. So that means that we know mechanically you have an intolerance to flexion. And again, we'll look at some of these stretches that people get given to try and stretch out that lower back. They actually get put into flexion. So if flexion is your injury mechanic, how you've created the problem, how logically does giving you more of that injury mechanic going to help your long-term problem? It isn't. It's going to make it way worse. But because the person you give it to doesn't understand what's going on and doesn't understand what it means when you release that tight back muscle, you get a bit of relief, but it's subject to you that you've potentially made the underlying issue with a disc bulge or disc damage and herniation far worse. So that's one thing we cannot tolerate. So if you think about sort of three categories of exercises, we have things that are well thought out, well understood, and they give us a good result. And now it's not going to be like an overnight thing, but we know methodically, step by step, we're on the right track because we understand the problem. Then we've got kind of random stuff in the middle that hasn't really been well thought out, but then again isn't necessarily that dangerous, isn't really going to give you, do harm, but it isn't really going to give you a set benefit. So again, that's it, it's a waste of time, but it's not dangerous. And then we slip into the third category, which we have zero tolerance for with back issues. And that's stuff that's going to, not only is it a waste of time, but it's making underlying issues worse. And as far as I'm concerned, there is zero excuse for a therapist, a clinician, a trainer, physio, whoever, giving you something like that that's going to make the underlying problem worse. There is zero excuse for that. And that's one of the things that I hate about the idea of non-specific lower back pain, is that's an excuse for people to not understand mechanics of injury, to not care enough about their clients to get a good result, and just shotgun basically random nonsense at people and just try and work out and see what sticks. But again, if you slip into that third category, if you're trying to help yourself, or if you're a therapist or someone trying to help a client, you're making the underlying issue far worse. Although they get a short-term release from it, you're making the underlying issue far worse, and there is zero tolerance for that if you care about doing your job. And if you're trying to sort your own back pain out, you have to be very careful what things you put into that sort of rehab program and movement program, so that you're not unwittingly making your long-term issues worse. So what I'll do now is I'll look at a couple of examples that I would like to say I haven't seen for a while, but they still keep rearing their ugly head, and we'll kind of understand why they're bad. And then I'll give you some examples of things that are more effective at that issue and will kind of get you on the right path. Okay, let's have a look at one of the sort of, a couple of the recommendations that I see given out to people, just in the vein of that random shotgunny stuff that's going to make your actual underlying problem worse. So let's assume there's somebody who's got a bulge or a herniation. So we know for a fact that you have a flexion-based mechanical issue, that the more flexion you do, the worse that's going to make your underlying disc damage and problem. So one of the things that I see get given is people do this sort of stretch where they bring their knees up, and then it's kind of pulling your knees to your chest here. So what we're doing, if you think about it, if I'm in this position here, my lower back has got a very slight sort of arch in it. That's your neutral position. So if I flatten it to the floor, I'm already into a little bit of flexion. Maybe not necessarily, too excessive, But then definitely, if I go here and now I'm pulling my knees up to my chest and curling up into a ball, that's definitely slipping me into flexion. So although it's going to, stretch the muscles out my lower back and make them feel a bit better, I've just, deliberately put myself into flexion. So if I've got a disc bulge or herniation, I'm now doing an exercise, consistently, that's going to make my issue far worse. And if I add that on top of the fact that, if the person's giving you, or you've seen this, if you're trying this is already on top of the fact that your injury mechanic hasn't been identified. Therefore, you're not removing flexion and aggravators during your day-to-day movements. So now what we've done, instead of lessening the wear and tear in your back, we've actually increased it and then managed to mask it with the idea of getting rid of tightness and pain. So your underlying issue now, you've actually increased the amount of wear and tear on that disc by adding in an exercise on top of faulty movement patterns and postures that haven't been identified, because either yourself or the person who's giving you the stretch hasn't taken the time to understand the mechanics of your injury. So that's how we can get into that third column. If you don't understand the full mechanics of your injury, or if you're giving people exercise, you don't understand what's going on, you've now made the problem worse. You've increased the amount of wear and tear on that disc, and you just masked it by kind of, giving temporary relief in terms of, lower back pain. And arguably anything that's worse than that, I'm just going to remove the receiver radio mic, is people sort of do this, they'll cross their legs, and then I can't even do it, they'll start sort of rocking like this. That's even worse now, because now we've got flexion with, moving dynamic compression, and we're really trying to force things to destabilize at the same time we expose ourselves to our biggest injury mechanic, which is just even more stupid. So again, if you're doing that sort of stuff and you've got disc bulges and herniations or flexion intolerance, you're making your problem worse. And if you've got those issues and someone's recommended those exercises to you, they do not understand your injury mechanics, and you're going to get worse. So you need to run from the hills as far away from that person as possible. So let's have a look at a more sensible idea that might give you the same sort of relief, but we're going to completely mitigate the risk, at least give you the sort of the perceived benefit, or risk, reward versus the risk that you would get from doing these sort of daft exercises. So I'm acutely aware my head is at the shot at this particular time, but I just wanted to sort of get a rough angle just to go through, getting down to the floor safely, because obviously for other people, just getting down to the floor is a monstrous task. So my favourite for most people is to do like a lunge strategy. So just real quick, use the hands, a bit of a brace on top of the thighs, you can come down a bit, and then we just lunge down, use the hands for support, and come down carefully like that, and at least gets us down to the floor somewhat safely. Still got to be a little bit careful with that technique. So what's a good alternative to, instead of trying to stretch away the back pain, so we know we've got tension here, we understand that in a lot of cases that tension is generated by muscles on the front of your thighs, and your hip flexors. So how can we get the same perceived relief, tension off that back? So rather than trying to attack a weak, annoyed muscle and forcing it to stretch, how about we take away that sort of tug-of-war component by working on the muscles that are too strong and are kind of locked on the whole time, that kind of, that false guy wire principle. So my favorite way to do it is to get a roller, come down to the floor, carefully out to all fours. We'll do one side at a time. Come down to supported on your forearms. And then what we're going to do is there's two sort of, bits of this technique. The first is what we call the scour. So all I'm going to do is gently roll down towards my knee and then back up towards my hip. And I'm just having an assessment to see what's in there first of all. And then I'm going to zero in on what I think is the most sensitive or tight spot. So you can stay on your forearms. If you need a bit of angle, like you feel like the sort of tight spots towards the outside of the leg, we can come up with this hand and just sort of turn the foot and adjust the angle if we need to, which I need to for me. So I've got a tight spot here. So what we do here, if it's super tight, you just stay here. But if you can, try and get like a little bit of movement, putting your heel up towards your bum. Like that. Doesn't have to be super big, straight away. Just go what you can with good control. Be careful of your back in this position. Again, it's a good idea to have a little bit of brace, just to protect your lower back in this position. And then we just work our way up, heel to bum like this. And as that muscle starts to be sort of, tricked into letting go, you'll get more movement. That heel will come close to your bum a lot easier. So a couple of minutes of this on each side, if it is tight, is going to start to remove that sort of tug of war that's going on by tricking these muscles into relaxing. And that in itself, because you've taken this away, you may suddenly be able to stand up straight, almost pain-free straight at the bat. Doesn't always work, but for a lot of people, it can be a good strategy to remove that pain. So obviously, there's still an underlying issue with instability. That's why this is being fired up. So this isn't a long-term strategy in and of itself, but it will give you the same benefit of that stretch, but with zero risk. So we get the reward of relief from the back with no risk that we're making the underlying mechanics of the issue far worse. So again, you do this, you get some relief, 2 to 3 minutes on each side. You may do it multiple times a day, because every time you sit and you slip into possibly flexion, it's going to reset this off and make it all lock off again. But long term, if this is happening, you've got an issue with stability somewhere. So it could be to do with the hips, as in your glutes and your hips don't work properly. Or it could be sort of, generally, especially if it grabs more on one side, it could be a lateral stability issue, so sort of side stability of your lower back. So you need to work on things like, McGill Big 3, particularly side bridge progressions to build that stability. And you'll find as you get strength here, or that flagpole analogy, and you get that kind of inherent stability you need, your body's going to, not need to rely on these guy wires. It's going to start to let them go. So long term, you have to take away false guy wires and tension and stiffness and replace it with stability and strength in the right areas. So again, rolling this, a good short-term strategy, will give you probably the same relief, if not more, than you would by trying to stretch out your lower back. But now we've got zero risk of increasing the underlying mechanical damage, particularly if you've got disc bulges and herniations and stability issues. Doing this is not putting you, or it shouldn't put you into a bad position where you're deliberately trying to round and flex that lower back and aggravate everything. So again, we have to approach things smart, and you need to know how to interpret pain signals within the context of what your injury mechanics are. So if someone hasn't spent some time trying to investigate your injury mechanics, they have no business giving you any exercises whatsoever. It's because it's just going to end in tears. You need to know the specifics and the nuances for each person, and that is what sets the foundation for a good, clean, safe, and effective plan going forward. So remember, lower back pain, don't just try random stuff and see what sticks. Have a sort of bit of a think about what you're doing, be a bit more methodical, and it all really starts with understanding your injury mechanics and aggravators, and that's going to dictate then the best path for you going forward. But again, try this. Good strategy, gets a lot of people out of trouble and lets them stand up straight, particularly if they have like a little bit of a flare up. But again, it's not a long-term solution in and of itself. It does help. Long-term, you have to work out really what's going on. And I'd say if these are tight, there's a stability issue somewhere, whether it be the hips or the lower back. And again, it's going to depend on your case. So again, don't do random stuff. Don't be putting yourself into bad positions. And again, remember guys, if you need help, I've got online coaching now available, link down below in the video. So yeah, don't leave it to chance. And again, don't seek a treatment, seek an education.